On average, an NFL career lasts 3 to 4 seasons. It's really only about 10% of all players that have been able to make a career last at least a decade. Typically, those guys are legends of the game. Those elite players are still human though, after all, and just like everyone else, they are not immune to father time. Whether they have missed a step or two, had an injury derail their career entirely, there are some NFL greats playing right now that simply aren't good anymore. And while it is doubtful that these guys will change the dwindling careers at this point, we can still appreciate what they've done and enjoy them on the field before they ultimately hang it up one day. And we do begin with one guy in particular that has just recently been cut, that being Von Miller. Miller was drafted by the Broncos in 2011 with the 2nd overall pick behind just Cam Newton. And to say he was a cornerstone for Denver for a decade would be an understatement. With his time in Denver by itself, he would accumulate a Hall of Fame worthy career, totaling 8 Pro Bowls, 4 second-team All-Pro honors, 3 first-team All-Pro honors, even winning Defensive Player of the Year. He would also play a big part in the team winning Super Bowl 50 and was even awarded Super Bowl MVP. With all his efforts, Miller would be awarded with his name being in the 2010s All-Decade Team. But things would begin to slow down in 2020 as Miller would miss the entire season due to a dislocated peroneal tendon. Peroneal. Somebody can correct me if I'm saying that incorrectly. When he returned for the 2021 season, he was slowly getting back to his groove, but with the Broncos not competing and Miller on an expiring contract, Denver would ship their 8-time Pro Bowler to LA. And together with Aaron Donald, the Rams would actually prove to be a success, as they would make it all the way to the Super Bowl, and once again, Miller would hoist a Lombardi trophy. In 2022, Miller would land in Buffalo on a rather questionable 6-year, $120 million deal. He would have a solid enough season until he'd tear his ACL in a Thanksgiving game against the Lions, making that now his 2nd massive injury of his career. Miller would eventually return in Week 5 of the following year, but was just not able to be that edge threat that he once was. Despite playing in 12 games, Miller wouldn't record a single sack and would actually only record 3 total tackles. A fall from grace to say the least. By 2024, Miller was just a rotational player for Buffalo. It didn't help that he would eventually be suspended for 4 games in the middle of the season for violating the league's personal conduct policy due to his arrest the year prior. And while he'd record 6 sacks this season, Von was just flat out not worth his contract, and that was with him already taking a pay cut. He would be let go by the Bills, and now you begin to wonder what's next for the 13-year vet. Through 13 seasons, Miller has accumulated 129.5 sacks, 27 forced fumbles, nearly 600 total tackles, along with the first and second team honors and 8 Pro Bowls mentioned earlier, to go along with his 2 Super Bowls and his 1 Super Bowl MVP. Miller will be in the Hall of Fame whenever he decides to hang it up, but I believe he has at most about a year left for a win-now team that can use him sparingly. Miller might be the most decorated player on this list, with the exception of maybe one, but all of these guys were at one point a star in the league, and it's always sad to see one of your favorites ride off into the sunset on a bit of a whim. The next guy on this list proves just that, as we have OBJ. Odell Beckham Jr. was selected by the Giants with the 12th overall pick in 2014. And by year 1, he was considered a star. He had it all: the athleticism, the route running, the ability to make the tough catch, and the signature moment.
That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen. You have to be kidding me.
In his first 3 seasons, Beckham would prove his hype of being a superstar, as he would total 288 catches with over 4,100 yards and 35 total touchdowns, earning 3 straight Pro Bowls, a Rookie of the Year, and 2 second-team All-Pro honors, even gracing the cover of Madden. But it was in 2017 that things really began to dwindle for OBJ in his career, as injuries would begin to mount. Odell would only play 4 total games in 2017, as he would fracture his ankle, ending his season by just week 5. When he returned in 2018, Beckham would sign a 5-year, $95 million extension and was on pace for another elite season in 2018, but was out the final 4 games due to a quad injury. In 2019, despite getting that contract extension, was traded to the Browns as Cleveland, believe it or not, was on pace to becoming a contender. His first season in Cleveland was solid, yes, but not quite what we were used to, and this was the running theme for his time in Cleveland. There was always flashes of what he used to be, but he could just not make it work with Baker Mayfield and the Browns' offense as a whole. Things would take a turn for the worst in 2020 though, as Odell would tear his ACL just 7 games in. He would bounce back, but he was nowhere near the same wideout he was after now 2 career-altering injuries. In 2021, Odell was traded midway in the season to the Rams as another piece similar to Miller to help them with their Super Bowl run. And while the regular season was nothing to write home about, the playoffs were a different story. He contributed in a huge way for LA all the way up to the Super Bowl against the Bengals. Very early in that game, Odell was actually running crazy. However, OBJ would sadly suffer his 3rd major injury. He would tear his ACL yet again, and that small glimpse of what OBJ used to be was gone. He wouldn't sign with a team in 2022 and would sign with Baltimore just midway through 2023. In 2024, Odell made big news when he signed with Miami as potentially the 3rd or 4th option for this incredibly high-powered offense. This led to absolutely nothing and was cut before the season was over, playing in just 9 total games and having a total of 9 catches. Even though Odell is just 32 years old, he has had 3 catastrophic injuries that took away his explosiveness a long time ago. I sincerely doubt that anyone would give him a shot at this point in his career. And many say Odell is overrated because of his iconic catch. And I gotta say, I disagree with that because before injuries took their toll, he was consistently a top 5 wide receiver. Yes, I know that was only for a few seasons, but injuries can do that to people sometimes. OBJ sadly was one of those victims. The next guy on our list, some argue shouldn't even be in the NFL due to off-the-field issues. But before all that messy business transpired, Deshaun Watson was arguably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. He was drafted in 2017 by the Texans as the top quarterbacks taken, and immediately Watson would establish himself as the franchise cornerstone, becoming a 3-time Pro Bowler in his first 4 seasons that included leading the NFL in passing yards in 2020. The problem was that Houston as a team just sucked. Despite leading the league in passing yards like I just mentioned, Houston went 4-12. And when you add the fact that Bill O'Brien shockingly would trade DeAndre Hopkins, Deshaun Watson wanted out. Watson would request a trade in 2021, but things would only get messier when those legal issues involving became headlines everywhere. Despite how messy his personal life got, it was actually Watson who refused to play for the Texans, as he was determined to be traded to another team. In 2022, once the case was resolved, many teams would begin to send offers, and Cleveland would end up winning the bid after offering Deshaun Watson a just straight up stupid amount of money. Not only stupid amount of money, that stupid amount of money was fully guaranteed. Stupid! This was a gamble in more ways than one, as he was never viewed in the same light again in the eyes of fans due to the misconduct, and he hadn't played in over a year and wouldn't be available until well into the season given his suspension. But the Cleveland Browns are going to always do what the Cleveland Browns do best: shove a foot in their mouth. Since the time that he returned midway in 2022, Watson has just never looked the same. Everything from passer rating, yards per game, QBR, completion percentage, everything was down. Watson maybe was just in his own head with the controversy, maybe it was the scheme in Cleveland, or just injuries beginning to pile up, but he was just never close to being the guy he once was back in 2020. This past season in 2024, Watson would suffer an Achilles tear and would even re-rupture it just a few months ago, which will most likely keep him out for the 2025 season. Even if he does miss 2025, when he comes back in 2026, he would still be just 30 years old, and one could argue he could still turn the clock back. But remember, he had returned prior to his Achilles tear, he had returned for a good 2 seasons worth and would keep getting hurt, and when he was on the field, he just didn't look right. And I sincerely doubt with this catastrophic Achilles tear that he'd come back and somehow be the superstar he was now 6 years removed. I could be wrong, but I think we've seen the best of Deshaun Watson already, and the best of Deshaun Watson has now been 5 years ago. We now move on to one of my favorite wide receivers of this past decade, and I can't think of a guy who has done more with less than DeAndre Hopkins. Drafted by the Texans in 2013, Hopkins immediately made his presence known. Through his 7 seasons with Houston, Hopkins would become a 4-time Pro Bowler, but even his 3 non-Pro Bowl seasons were great seasons when you look at them from the broader spectrum. And again, this was with a revolving door at quarterback. Before 2017, Hopkins was stuck with guys like TJ Yates, Ryan Mallett, Brandon Weeden, Tom Savage, and Brock Osweiler, to name a few. In a controversial move, Hopkins was traded to the Cardinals for next to nothing. Stupid! In year 1 in the desert, Hopkins would remain elite, now paired with Kyler Murray, securing another Pro Bowl nod, and would manage over 100 receptions and nearly 1,500 yards. But in 2021, Hopkins would start to deal with injuries and off-the-field issues, as 2021 ended after just 10 games with a torn MCL. In 2022, Hopkins was suspended the first 6 games, appearing in only 9 total, but still compiled a 64 700-yard run in just one half of a season. Even though when healthy, Hopkins could still produce, he still did miss plenty of games over the past 2 seasons with Arizona, and the team was headed in the wrong direction. So they would actually cut ties with Hopkins in a cap space move, and despite saying he wanted to go to a contender after Arizona, he would ultimately land in Tennessee. And it's here where his career would slowly begin to die. He did have a decent year in 2023, but in 2024 he was used so sparingly that he was eventually traded to the Chiefs in what many thought would be the final dagger for Kansas City to make a three-peat. And they did come close, but they got blown out at the very end by the Philadelphia Eagles. And I might add, DeAndre, in the playoffs, he was virtually a no-show. He had 3 total catches for just 29 yards and a single touchdown. He's more known for the drop in the Super Bowl than anything else in 2024. Since 2021, Hopkins has only had 1 solid season, with the others being lackluster to say the least. He still has some left in the tank compared to the likes of an OBJ, but Hopkins is no longer the dynamic wideout. In that run-first offense, it's safe to say that Hopkins, even if he still plays for another few seasons, may have had his final 1,000-yard campaign already. Our final entry comes from a guy who has played since 2005 and is the most accomplished on this list. Maybe some of you guys saw it coming, but for my doubters out there, it is time for you to come to the realization that Aaron Rodgers is no longer a great player in the NFL. Rodgers has now been in the league for 20 seasons, going to his 21st, should he even return, and has had one of the greatest careers in the NFL. In his 18 seasons with the Packers, Rodgers would accrue 10 Pro Bowls, 4 first-team All-Pro honors. He would lead the league in passer rating 4 times, and he's a 4-time MVP and a 1-time Super Bowl champion. With such an acclaimed career, you'd think Rodgers would just retire as a Packer, but just like his predecessor, that just was not gonna happen. With Jordan Love on the team in 2020, Rodgers still had a lot left to prove. He definitely played with a chip on his shoulder. Those 4 MVPs I mentioned before, 2 of them were after Jordan Love was drafted. It still wasn't enough, and the team was ready to move on, however, so they would ship him to the New York Jets, and Rodgers would instantly make the Jets Super Bowl contenders, as all they needed on paper was a quarterback. But in the first few plays of his first game, he would rupture his Achilles and would miss the entire season. And from here, his career has never recovered to what it once was. When Rodgers returned in 2024, he simply wasn't the MVP we were used to seeing. And that's despite the Jets bringing in everyone Rodgers wanted to bring. New York would go 5-12 with him in the lineup and would opt to let the 41-year-old find a new team. And I doubt going to his 3rd team after a tumultuous stint with his 2nd will prove to be much of a success. Some argue that a bad year for Rodgers is still a solid year for most. And to that I say, Rodgers had one of the best offensive rosters in the league with the Jets, if you guys remember. And just because he did better than Zach Wilson statistically, doesn't mean that he is good anymore. Wherever he goes, when he hangs it all up though, he will undoubtedly be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But what do you guys think? Those are just 5 guys I named on this list, but there are a lot more. If you guys want to see a part 2, or if you just enjoyed the video outright, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're still here, love you guys. But on that note, shaboy!